Okay, well, it's
Here I am.
7:35, so we'll go ahead and get started, and maybe some other people will log in. Uh, Hello to everyone. Tonight is webinar number 4 in the Noble webinar series, Preparing Students for the Global Workplace. Our guest tonight is Leslie Foreman, who is joining us from Santiago, Chile, which is very exciting because it's our first guest from out of the U.S., and we appreciate her joining us. Let me get my next slide here. Where are we? So welcome. Thanks everyone for coming.
And I want to start off by explaining
tonight. If you could type in the chat box where you're joining us from. Oh, yes. Oh, Chicago. Okay. Oh, London. All right. Florida. Okay, great. And just because I want to play around with this a little bit, I was going to see how this polling system works. See if it shows. Is this showing up here? Can you see the poll on your screen? Can someone type in the chat box? Yeah, okay. So I have it to say broadcast the results so everyone can see. How did you hear about the webinar? Facebook, Leslie's Facebook. Yeah, because we're trying to work on how we can. Okay, so Facebook and Twitter is kind of and those have been kind of the main things we've been using. All right, so sounds good on that one. And then I had one more I wanted to do. I think these are kind of fun. Even though I know Elizabeth doesn't teach, I wanted people to ask. I wanted to ask what everybody teaches.
I think we've got a few people who aren't
Leslie,
teachers.
entrepreneurs.
We've got a diverse group. Yeah.
And Elizabeth, since you don't teach, you want to write in what you do? So the not a teacher people, we want to write in what you do?
Mayel's one of the founders of a company called Babbleverse that's basically making it possible to connect people in lots of different languages through smartphones. So it's like
an entrepreneur. Okay, yay, entrepreneurs are good.
Like all the languages of the world.
Okay, cool. All right.
Together.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, again, thanks everyone for joining. And real quick, just a commercial on noble.org. Check out for resources if you have resources to share there. You can submit through the website and do it through the contact us. All right, upcoming webinars. I messed up here. I didn't remove the tonight's webinar, which is on there, but you can see for through February and March the list. And March 8, I'm thinking maybe it'll just be an open forum where someone can propose a topic, or we might just discuss a plan for future webinars for next year. I'm thinking of maybe opening up a call for proposals instead of me approaching people and inviting them. Elizabeth, no, actually, we want to bring in interest. So we're glad that you joined us, even though you're not a teacher. So that Leslie's topic is much more broad than some of our previous topics. So, I think it just depends who wants to join and is interested in learning about something. So we're glad you're here, and we're glad Leslie's other friend is here. Just so we get moving on to kind of the meat of the webinar. We'll just start out quickly with a couple background questions for Leslie. Then she's going to talk about her Career Compass initiative. And throughout the time she's talking, people can go ahead and type comments and questions throughout so you don't forget them later. And I'll try to monitor the chat box. And if Leslie can focus on her presentation and the chat box, she might want to jump in and answer, or we might go through the questions at the end, and that's when we'll kind of cover Q&A. So what I wanted to get Leslie to tell us before she starts on the progress. Well, I was just going to, if you could tell us a little bit about what you're doing in Chile now and how you got there, and then start, or is that all going to be within the dialogue of the presentation?
Introducing. So my name is Leslie Foreman. I'm originally from San Francisco, and I went to school at the University of California, Berkeley. I'm actually going to turn off the webcam because I think that the bandwidth isn't very good.
I think you're going to have to turn off your video because it's freezing up.
Or should I leave it on? Okay. I'm going to turn it off. Turning it off.
I think you're going to have to turn off your video because it's freezing up.
Turn off anyways. I'm going to keep talking. So I am originally from San Francisco, from Leslie Foreman. Turning off. Okay. It's trying to turn off anyways.
I think you're going to have to turn off your video because it's freezing up.
I am originally from San Francisco, from Is that working again
I
now?
think you should turn the camera off because it's messy. I think it's
Good.
slowing
Okay.
down,
Anyway.
and that's why we usually don't keep the
Got it.
camera off.
Great. So I'm originally from California. After I studied Latin American studies, but when I graduated, I decided to move to China, and I spent.
I think you're gonna have to turn off your video because it's freezing up.
I'm going to turn off my microphone and see if that helps.
I spent 4 years in China, originally teaching at a university, and then I had a bunch of other jobs. I taught English at first, and then I worked in corporate social responsibility. I worked in advertising. I worked in consulting with lawyers. Eventually, I got burned out on China and back to Chile, where I had studied several years before. I came through a program called Startup Chile, which is entrepreneurial community. I teach classes at 2 different universities. One is called the Universidad de Desarrollo, which is a big private university. I'm also going to teach at a different school, and that'll be a class about e-commerce this next semester. And I do other marketing, translation, training projects for other companies. So let's just go quickly through these. Let's see. Can I control it? Oh, I can. Okay, so here's a map with what I just showed you. The Startup Chile, I work out of an office called CoWork, and different things I did when I was in China. And the main question people ask me about all of this stuff is, how can I find a job in a foreign country? And this whole presentation and this whole visual system that I'm putting together is my answer to this question. This is actually the very first time I've presented this. So you can consider this like a beta, and I really want to hear your feedback. I want to hear if I am answering the questions you think I should answer in this, areas that you think make national careers, if you think it should be broader or more specific or more technical or more anything, just let me know, because I really want your feedback, and I really want to just build this based on what people want to know. So I've been working with a Chilean illustrator. His name is Ignacio Barceló. And here's 2 different versions that he's given me of the whole composite of the International Career Compass. But I think that neither of these composites really does justice to everything. And I'm going to go through one part at a time, explaining what I think the steps are. And I've done this for people who are from any country, who are thinking of moving to any country. It could be a range of ages, but the majority of the people who've contacted me are people who are usually in their mid to late 20s, and they're people who are quite ambitious and people who have experience traveling and are bored and looking for both adventure and professional growth. And I think that covers a lot of different people. It could be a fairly broad age range, but people who are trying to embark on this kind of journey without some sort of formal program to help them. So it all starts with asking a bunch of honest questions. These questions include the wind in your sails, as I'm calling it. What motivates you to embark on this journey? Different people have told me different things. Some say they're looking for adventure, some want to satisfy ambitions, some want to satisfy their creativity, escape from something, learn a language, have a different kind of lifestyle, escape macroeconomic problems, or go into a place that has more opportunities, make more money, get more professional standing, or maybe reinvent their lives or careers. So the first part is to think about this carefully. And also think carefully about the boat, your current situation, the education, experience, family, finances, languages, skills, etc. What sort of situation are you in life as you sort of consider this sort of possibility and transition? For somebody who is right out of college and single, it's completely different than someone who has a bunch of kids who are in elementary school. But I do think these things are possible if it's a priority. It just requires figuring things out. Biggest question of all, maybe it's about relationships. It doesn't fit neatly into any stages, and I've shown this to a couple people and they've told me that this definitely needs to be in here. I'm not sure where it fits, but these are really big questions. A lot of times when people live and work abroad, there are international, intercultural relationships at some point, and questions about how serious is this, really how I want to base my life. Questions are really the first step. And once you're relatively clear on your answers to these questions, I think the next step is to start thinking about how to make this big dream happen, as you've clarified what the dream is. And I think the next part of this, with my illustrator, we decided that this is like navigation lines. So like putting together the ropes and the route to navigate this boat. And this sort of path comes little step by reaching out to friends, friends of friends, new contacts to figure out better information about what specific career possibilities, life possibilities are really like, and to try to collect unfiltered stories, updated information, etc. And I think the next step after that, as you're collecting all this information, it's all working towards what I'm calling a landing position. This is like a dock or a harbor. This would be like your first step into a foreign country. It could be through some sort of formal program like a fellowship, an incubator, accelerator, internship, scholarship, some sort of English teaching program, volunteer program, working holiday, where there's an organization that sets things up for you. Or it could be something that's informal, where you can save up money and make the leap, potentially stay with friends or family, or couch surf, or figure things out as you go along. But in either of these cases, I feel like there's definitely some research and legwork that it's useful to do both on your own and through your personal networks to figure out how to do this. But one thing about this is that this is often temporary. A program that's maybe for 6 directly aligned with somebody's long-term career goals or long-term job that they expect to sort of sustain them over time. And I think that when I'm asked these questions about how to get a job in a foreign country, I feel like this landing position is an intermediate step. Like when I first went to China, I taught English through a program that was coordinated from the States. And then when I came to Chile, I was as part of Startup Chile, which is a government program that was also coordinated, and they kind of helped us with the visas and all sorts of things like that. So I think that this sort of intermediary help is helpful. And it is possible to do with the help of friends and family, but I feel like the intermediary step is important. And part of this is figuring out the logistics: housing, visas, insurance, school. Depending on your setup, some of these might be figured out beforehand, some of them you may be figuring out as you go along. But it just takes some time and potentially headaches. When you've safely disembarked in this new country, I think there's a couple of important things to focus on. Local contacts, meeting like-minded locals. I think like the most underrated networking possibility is house parties of all kinds. I've met so many people at different, birthday parties, barbecues, housewarming parties, anything with friends of friends. Also sort of like industry communities. You could take classes, do sports, music, but meeting people locally. And I think a kind of a diverse group of people. I think it's important to meet people of multiple ages and not just people who are the same age as you. Local fluency. Over time, people gain more fluency and comfort in this place that they're now living. Part of this is language. I think it goes beyond language. It's culture and how to get things done. And oftentimes these things are really subtle. I mean, you could take language classes, but I don't think it's like a lot of things you just have to figure out over time. And this fluency, I really liked how the illustrator put this here because it's like being able to skate forward and move things along and really be effective in country. Overcoming obstacles, bureaucracy, confusion, illness, homesickness, etc. There's always obstacles, and being able to navigate getting things done is important for dealing with that. And at this point, as you've done all these sort of different steps, you've built up contacts, you've arrived in a place, you've figured out where to live and everything, then, drum roll please, you can find local opportunities. This could be like a longer term in your field, a quote unquote real job, which is what everybody's asking me about how to find. Potentially a local business opportunity. I know a lot of people who are expats that have started businesses in all the places that I've lived. Also, there's online options. A lot of people, I know people who serve clients in the States from here in Chile or from other places. You're far more likely to find these sort of opportunities through friends rather than through websites, especially as a foreigner with an unusual background. So this sort of network and this sort of like local contact is crucial. Hooray! And then this stage might last years until you're ready to get moving on. And at some point you may be ready for a new adventure. Trust me, you'll know when this is. And I was working with Ignacio, the artist, to make a boat of a different style because clearly the situation has changed, his perspective has changed, and a step here is figuring out how to build on what you have changed and learned and developed in this place. And keeping in touch. Maintain real ties with faraway friends. I'm still in close touch with a friend of mine in China. I named her kids. I gave them English names. And whenever people ask me about sourcing products from China, I always introduce them to her. And it's really both personally and professionally gratifying to keep in touch. So anyways, this is kind of like the sequence that I have. And I just wanted to pause here and ask you guys for your feedback on all these different sections. Specifically what I want to know is what part of this is most useful, what kind of alignment or organization makes the most sense to you, and how might you use this in your classes or in your life or in your experience? This is the first time I've ever presented it to people that were not sitting right next to me. I really appreciate your feedback. It's awesome. I'm thinking about turning this into a video, like
So
putting it in
Leslie,
a
are you
slide.
reading these to come back with the response?
Leslie, are you reading these to come back?
Yeah, I'm reading them. I'm reading them. This is great. This is great. I'm not thinking it's just for students, any age and any nationality. Like the reason I think it's easier to see yourself in hand-drawn things as opposed to like a whole bunch of pictures of me, right? And I think that it's, I think as RC said that like one must like accept that this is a process. I think that is something that I've learned in the like 7 season. A lot of things involve building up time. Building networks is really important because where a company has hired one expat, they could hire 2 or 3, or people are always leaving. So finding where people have like made their own sort of niche. Another thing that I think is important to point out about this is that there's a lot of formal programs that exist for things like teaching English and volunteering, but most of the people that have contacted me have specifically told me that that's not their like career goal, and they're trying to figure out how to get beyond that and past that and apply their knowledge from many years of study and work and experience as a professional in something specific. And I think that for many people, these intermediate steps are still very helpful. And I think that there are a lot of things that you could do. You could apply for different sorts of fellowships or different sorts of formal programs that could help, or just figure out how to make it work for yourself with the idea that there would be like 6 months or a year that you would be like adjusting and prepare logistically for that as much as possible. What else? I think that from this stuff, the most important thing that people need to learn is very specific things about networking skills. Would you agree with that? Because I think that's something that I did not learn when I was in college. Uh, I think that the world has changed since then, but I think that the universities are probably doing a better job of that now. But still, I think that how to be memorable, how to keep in touch with people, how to reach out to some friend of your father's who has interesting experience, how to what to say at a party so you don't sound like you're, obnoxious pitch person, but you're like an interesting person who's making friends. So I think that these things are really important. Yeah, how to make it work and decide how you're going to make it happen. I completely agree with that. And I don't think that you have to have these things figured out all at once. I think that there's a lot of like social pressure to have your, I don't know, 5 or 10-year friend plan. But this is why whenever I talk about this, I'm always like, yeah, if someone invites you to someone you don't really know's birthday party, you should go, especially if it's at someone's house. And I think that that sort of thing sounds much less intimidating and much more effective than something that's like build your network in 10 easy steps. And the power of saying yes, exactly. The power of saying yes, I'll try this, or yes, I've never heard of this, but it sounds really cool. Yes, um, let's see how, I can't wait, this sounds great. Yes, I can learn how to be an advertising copywriter, even though I've never done that before. That could be really interesting. So I have a couple more things that I think are like concrete skills that are important for this. Do you want me to go ahead and show them? Networking is one of them, but I have a couple more. So yeah, so fundamental skills necessary to create this kind of global career. I believe there's at least 4. 1, a strong professional skill set. if you are somebody who is looking to be respected as a professional, you really need to know your stuff. And the things that I have highlighted here are like all very specific and technical: intellectual property law, investor relations, project management, teaching middle school science, technical mining mechanics, all examples from people that I know. Exactly. Things don't work out the way you expect. That's one of these things that I have on here because that's like super important to be able to adapt and to be able to figure things out. But I think that like knowing what your skills are and having confidence in them, having built them over time, potentially in your home country, either through work or school or something else. I think that one of the disadvantages of living, working in foreign countries is that you get very, very little formal training. I've gotten almost no training in all the time I've been working overseas. A little bit lately, I've gotten some training about teaching methods from one of the universities where I teach. But everything else, they've just expected me to know how to do on my own. And I think that a lot of things are just figuring it out on your own, but also realizing what your skills are. See, the next one I would say, a localized quote unquote personal brand. I don't really like this phrase, but I think it's the best phrase I could think of that explains what this is. How can you articulate what you have to offer in a way that resonates with the local job market? Example, here in Chile, people are very, very, very much defined with by their degree. Very, like, I'm constantly asked, what are you? Like, as if I'm a lawyer or an engineer or a publicist or a journalist, and I'm not any of those things. And if the conversation goes in that direction, I end up sounding like this not very valuable person. But a way that you can kind of go around that is if there are like any big names on your resume, companies, universities, places, you should highlight them. In Chile, people seem to be very interested that I grew up in Silicon Valley. Having lived the first 20 years of my life in Silicon Valley, I never thought about it very much. But that's something people are very interested in here. When I was in China, people were very interested in the fact that I had gone to Berkeley. They were very interested in my white face. And I think that another thing that people were very interested in China was my undergraduate GPA, because I had a high GPA, which I think that one of my bosses said that he hired me because of that. But I think the lesson here is any big names, if you worked at Apple 10 years ago, that should be in the first line summary in like a resume, because that's something they will have heard of, even if it's not the most recent thing. And since you're not going to be like fitting the mold they're looking for anyway, yeah, age is definitely consideration as well. I think there's a lot of, it goes both ways. I think in some places it's like you're very wise and experienced. My parents just returned to the US after 6 months in Africa. They were working in Ghana as business coaches. I can send you a link to their blog if you want. And there it was like, oh, you like wise, sage people. Like, but there's also major age discrimination. In Chile, it said that if you're over 40, changing jobs is like, why would you ever do that? You're supposed to stay there till you retire. Also, if you're younger than they expect, I mean, most people in this country are still in college until they're like 25. So if you're like 22, they like don't know what to do with you. So equivalent local degrees, how does yours compare? Something to think about. Also, needs of local industries. These may not be things that you would think of immediately. Like I have a young American friend who has a degree in international studies, which doesn't mean anything to Chilean boss because they don't know what it is. And they're not necessarily that interested in multidisciplinary, broad education. But she had a lot of experience working in restaurants and the service industries in the US. And she was thinking about this, and she's like, well, where should I apply where they value that? And now she works at the Ritz-Carlton, where Her service industry experience from the US, where they value service, is valued, and her English speaking skills are valued. And software developer in Germany, because there is a scarcity of software developers there. Outreach. Are people really interested in reaching out to your home country? What do you do in terms of like media relations or investor relations or just general like translation, cultural brokerage, things like that there? Questions or comments on this one? Okay, well, I'll leave it open for that, and I'll go on to the next one. I don't have that many. Networking. I talked about this one before. Be proactive and findable, meeting new people, especially at private events, keeping in touch with people, joining communities of like-minded people, co-working spaces. I've gotten basically all of the opportunities I found in Chile through the co-working space that I work. It's pretty awesome. This one we touched on before, and I really want to open this one up to discussion. Flexibility and resilience. This is something that Elizabeth touched on as well. How best to equip students and people in general to deal with cross-cultural misunderstandings, visa trouble, loneliness, illness, and other obstacles. I could talk for like an hour about many, 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 many misunderstandings that I have been part of involving employment contracts and visas and apartments and not saying the right thing, not doing the right thing. Yeah. And I think that there's a really important, like, just like ability to take care of yourself and figure out what's most important to you personally and make sure you have that. And figure out if there are holidays that are important to you, host them yourself. If you are into running, figure out where you can run. If you are into vegan cooking, find people who are into that, or figure out where you can find the ingredients. I mean, I think that the level of uncertainty is something that some people are better equipped for than others. And maybe part of this is for people to identify in themselves whether they want to take on this sort of challenge. What do you think about this? I feel like it's a really open question. It can't be taught, only through hands-on experience. Fair enough. Keep open mind and go with the flow. I would totally agree with that. Even moving from high school to college involves a lot of these same issues. That makes sense. Yeah, I feel like that's an interesting parallel because people have when they go from high school to college, they have to be really independent. They have like limitless choices, options to choose from, a lot of listening and observing before jumping in, being like a really observant child. When I first moved to China, I would go to the vegetable markets every day and get quizzed on the names of all the different kinds of fruits and vegetables. And I didn't know anything about this. in this model. Yes, I think when I've designed all of this, it's been for somebody who doesn't already have a job where they'd be assigned to do this. It's somebody who's trying to figure out how to do it on their own. I think that if you work for like the State Department or a company like Bechtel or I don't know, BHP Billiton or one of the really large multinationals that has really large big budget projects and hires expats, those people have relocation consultants and they do all sorts of psychological tests for this kind of stuff to figure out if they have the flexibility and resilience. They hire psychologists to identify which people are suited for this and which ones are not. A Dutch friend of mine in Shanghai worked in a human resources consultancy that did that kind of psychological testing on people. That particular one was to see if they were high potential to become CEOs. But I know that there are definitely companies that do this for cross-cultural competency. Observing and then acting. I've gotten in trouble for that one multiple times. A lot of money to be made in relocation agencies. Definitely. Definitely. I think it's a really good niche. To help people deal with all these sorts of logistics, particularly if people are being relocated by their companies. But even people who are independent, who are in visa trouble, are totally willing to pay. This being me on multiple occasions. The bottom line is frankly the bottom line. If you have money or a way to get money while settling, then you'll be fine. I would agree with that, actually. I think that money and flexibility are really what this comes down to. And it kind of bothers me that I've come up with this whole thing that comes down to like money and privilege. Like I feel like I was educated to think that things go differently than that. All of my time in foreign countries has, I don't know, continually gotten me thinking about money and power. It was more fun and adventurous without. Definitely, 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 definitely. Yes, yes. Not if you provide for a family. So it depends on the situation. It goes back to the one that I said with the boat. Because I think all of these considerations are different based on an honest look at your sort of circumstances and goals. Yeah, definitely. A lot of things have been a lot cheaper for me living overseas. I've never had my own car. My Chilean health insurance and healthcare is very affordable. Um, Chile is not a particularly cheap place. My cost of living to earning ratio was much better when I lived in China. But it's definitely all relative, and it depends on what your expectations are and what you're looking for. So this is basically the end of this presentation that I have. I really want to hear your questions and feedback. And if any of you want to get on the microphone, I think that's a possibility with this system. Or we can just keep typing. And yeah, questions, comments, ideas?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Leslie. I didn't mean to scoot to that slide. I don't know if you did it or my hand actually did.
That's fine. No, I'm done.
Yeah, if someone wants the mic, I can give them the mic.
I can give them the mic.
Did I have someone who guided me through my process? Which part of the process? Like, I think there's been this is basically been over the course of many years. I graduated from college in 2006, and I've basically been going through all of these different sort of steps since then. The first time I moved to China, I was part of a program called CIEE, Teach in China, and they basically helped coordinate the visas and helped me get a job. And I was able to reach out to their program veterans, and I didn't know anything about China at the time. And then later on, I decided to stay on, but basically, no. Like, I didn't, like, there was a book that had inspired me to do this, and different people have sort of guided me at different points. But no, not really. When I came to Chile, I was part of another structured program, Startup Chile, and they helped a ton with logistics and visas. Like, they opened the visa offices in the afternoon when they're usually only open in the morning, like major feats of government connections. But like, I didn't have anybody guiding me through ideas about like um, flexibility, resilience, networking, being able to see steps forward. I had no idea what I would do after teaching English. But near the end of that year, I decided that I wasn't ready to leave China, and I ended up getting an internship in Shanghai, the American Chamber of Commerce. And that was the only job I've ever gotten where it was listed online, and a lot of people applied, and I was chosen. But yeah, did I have somebody at my college to guide me through this stuff? Not really. I went back to college after a full year in Chile, and it was my last semester, and I was completely overwhelmed, completely reverse culture shocked, had way too many activities and classes, and I had this like intense fear of missing out. I did way too many things all at once. I nearly accepted a job that would have taken me to either Peru or Ecuador, one of the few things that would have actually used my Latin American Studies degree. But that would have required me to start working before I graduated. I had too many things on my plate. And then, like a week after I graduated, I was reading this book called Delaying the Real World. And that gave me the idea to go to China. And everybody in my life was really shocked when I decided to do that. Both my mom and my dad immediately talked to people in their offices, and they were like, "My daughter's moving to China. You know China. Talk to her." So I got emails from a colleague of my mom's, a colleague of my dad's that same day that had both spent time in China. And I think that thinking back on that, that was like, your China network starts with people that you already know. Like my parents, I already knew them. And it was just mentioning this. The immediate reaction was to ask around the office. My dad's immediate reaction was to call the guy who is the China manager in the office to get him to talk to me about China. And there was someone in my mom's office who had taught English in China. I think she was a missionary or something. I had never heard of her before either. But yeah, I think that one of my the reasons why I write about this topic and why I care about this topic is because I've had very little guidance. Occasionally I have talked to different how coaches or counselors or different people for like brief things. Getting legal status, having a company sponsor your work visa. This has been very complicated on multiple occasions. When I taught English at a school, it was fine because in China there's a specific kind of teacher visa that's fairly common. and not that complicated for the school to do because they always get people in the same category. If you're in a group of people who are in the same category, it tends to be relatively easy. Later on in China, always jumping through hoops and paying agents to help. And apparently they've cracked down on those things a lot. But every 6 months, I would have to go to this office to bring a stack of cash, and they would fix it for me. And it was always kind of like, okay, this is kind of sketchy, but it worked last time. So, and then here in Chile, I got a visa through this prestigious government program. And then a year later, I tried to renew it, and I was rejected. And at the time, I had 4 jobs, and I was in school, and I had gotten papers from my 4 part-time jobs, and I was rejected, and I got very sick, and it was very stressful. And eventually I hired this relocation agent to help me, and she helped me fix this situation. And I should have just called her in the first point. But yeah, I think it all comes down to like money and getting recommendations for people who can help you with this stuff. If you work for a large company that has competent HR staff, I think that it's less of an issue because they will, call the same people or the same kinds of people. But as like an independent person, it's like constant visa limbo, and it can be very stressful. I was asked far too many times the last time I was in visa trouble if I was going to get married. I thought that was a completely inappropriate question for them to be asking me. But if you're like a local hire and you're trying to get a formal visa, it's often very complicated. You'll have to go on like an urgent visa-cation and lots of paperwork. You may have to go back to your home country. You'll need to get your degrees notarized in the original, like lots and lots of paperwork. Okay, what would I tell undergrads? What's the one thing you should do while you're in college to help make this transition after college? I think study abroad is one thing. I think that's a very doable thing for a lot of college students that are interested in going overseas. That's the number one thing I would say. The number 2 thing I would say is get really good at reaching out to people you don't know over LinkedIn and how to be polite, be flattering, ask good questions, and like engage with people as like a peer or a professional. I think that that's a really important skill for a college student. I get quite a few emails from college students, and I always just reply to them because I think this is really important. I think it's really important for students to learn how to use LinkedIn effectively to find and contact people who do things that seem interesting to them and to sort of promote themselves and their own skills in a sort of professional way. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay. Okay. What else? I think another thing that's important in terms of language skills is for people to have an experience where these language skills are useful for doing something. When I was 20, I led a high school summer program in Costa Rica. And I had spoken Spanish my entire life, but this was the first time that I was like, organizing events and coordinating things and dealing with like the company's money. And it was really powerful for me to realize that this skill was useful for doing stuff and doing stuff for other people. And I think that in terms of like connecting the dots to why language skills matter. If more people can have that kind of experience, whether it's doing like an internship while studying abroad or just something where they're using the language to do something. I think that is really powerful and really important. Yeah, to split the family. One stays to maintain stability, the other goes off to establish a life. It sucks being apart, but it's an option. I've met quite a few people who have done that. I think that, as you said, RC, like if there's lots of money involved, it helps. Like people who are like really high level executives might be able to, the priorities might be different. And I think it also depends on how far away it is. I mean, in Chile, where the mining industry is really strong, a lot of people within the same country they work like 8 days on, 8 days off in the mines. They're always traveling back and forth. I met some guys who were mining mechanics from Australia and Canada, and they do like 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off, or maybe it was something like that. So they were constantly flying, constantly going back and forth, and it was like difficult for relationships, good for seeing the world. Yeah, there's a difference between conversational language and language specific to the field you're working in or planning to work in. Very, very true. One of the best things that I did for this was that I took a class on creativity and innovation in Spanish. It was like a grad school course. And a lot of things about that have been really positive. In terms of language, to like learn something new in Spanish was a really good way for me to get past a plateau and to act. And like I learned new things in that class I had never heard of before. There's things that I know how to say in Spanish I don't know how to say in English that involve like perception and innovation and things like that. And I think that, yeah, the language skills are like it's different, but there's also kind of a paradoxical thing about language. Like I feel like sometimes I am respected more if I speak English than if I speak. This was particularly true in China, where if I tried to speak Chinese in a meeting, it would just like not go over well at all. And I learned this completely the hard way. And it was much, much better to speak English and get the guy who was Chinese, who was the best at English, to be my designated translator, because that showed a higher level of respect for the topic at hand, which was this interesting thing. And I even see this here in Chile, where my Spanish is much, much better than my Chinese. But if I like steer the conversation to be in English, I have more control over it. And I have more power. And this is, I'm sure there have been studies about cross-cultural negotiation that have been done about this, but it is something to keep in mind. And I think that in terms of like your personal experience and relationships and lifestyle in a country where they speak a language other than your native language, learning the language is very, very positive. In business, I think that you need to know your audience really well. It's weird. It's weird. Like, you're totally right. You do come across as the foreigner, but I think you come across as the foreigner anyway. And even if on the street people don't look at me twice because there's a lot of people here in Chile that are much blonder than I am, and I sort of fit in visually, I think that it works to my advantage to emphasize that I'm a foreigner. If I'm like trying to be like, oh yeah, well, I'm not ingeniería comercial, and I'm not psicóloga either. Like it's not the common categories and like the common topics of conversation, I think, are things that don't necessarily work in my favor. It's weird. Like I feel like in the work that I do, it's much better to sort of try to be revered as a foreigner. Though I do teach classes in both English and in Spanish. They're business classes. And I've been told that when I speak Spanish, I sound 10 years younger. So I've been trying to work on that, trying to work on my authoritative public speaking voice and in Spanish to and be able to not sound 10 years younger than I am, because I'm relatively young and I teach college freshmen who are expecting an authority figure. Like that's not it's not ideal to sound really young. Good questions, good comments. Keep going. What else do you want to talk about?
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Okay, well, if
Okay.
not,
If
I'm
not,
sorry, I am echoing. I don't know what
sorry,
is going on with the
I don't know
connection
what is
tonight.
going on with the connection tonight.
But here you have
But
Leslie's
here you have Leslie's
contact information.
contact
Leslie, do
information.
you have a web address you want to
Web
key
address you want
in to the
Yeah,
chat
I'll put it
box?
in the chat box. I have this. I'm redoing this website, but it is there. And I will post these slides and some notes from this conversation on the blog, because I think it could reach more people. It could be really good. So I will do that.
Yeah, and I'll post the
And
recording. We're going to post the others tomorrow. It's just the sound was bad tonight, but people can still look at the slides in the text chat.
yeah, I'll post them. And because I think it's useful to share this stuff. And I'm so glad you can make RC. This is great. Thank you. I would love to
Well,
hear
and
any more of
thanks
your
to
comments, or
Leslie.
you can email me anytime.
Sorry, I just talked over you. Yeah, thank you so much to Leslie for joining us and for you all coming to the webinar. And I apologize for the echoing and the sound is cutting out even on Leslie's end. So I don't know what's going on with that. Maybe, I don't know if it's Adobe having a bad night or our connection.
The internet, technology.